Peyote stitch is a method of bead weaving which is really quite simple once you get the hang of it. There are a variety of ways you can do it. One of the ways is to use delica seed beads, which are flat and very precisely cut, and this creates a very even and smooth surface. Or you can even use large beads or something like short bugle beads to create a more uneven textured surface. What I'm going to show you today is called flat odd count peyote stitch. You really only need 3 things to do peyote stitch, and that is thread, a needle, and beads. It's important that you use beading thread because something that's cotton or polyester, like a sewing thread, will deteriorate over time. And it's also important that you use a needle that's small enough to fit through your beads. In this example, I'm also using a bright red bead, and that's going to be our stopper bead, but I'll tell you more about that in a moment. The first thing you'll need to do is apply your stopper bead. As you can see here, I've drawn a diagram. You take the thread and pass it through the bead one time and then loop around and come back through another time. I've already done this with the red bead. It's about 6 inches from the end. You're going to weave that end in later, and as you pull it tight here, it'll just stay and it'll hold all of your other beads in place. I've drawn another little diagram for you. This is a very, very simplified picture of what peyote stitch actually is. As you can see, it ends up looking sort of like a brick-laid pattern. This is odd count right here. I'm going to use a few more beads than this, but hopefully you'll get the idea. What you're going to do first is pick up an odd number of beads. I'm starting with 7. And once you get those 7 on, you're going to slide them all the way down to where your stopper bead is. The next thing is going to be to pick up an 8th bead. This 8th bead is going to be the start of your very next row. Now, as you can see, just like in the diagram, this 8th bead is going to lay on top of that 7th bead, and you're going to pass the needle through the bead before it. It's going to take some practice to get the tension just right at first, but once you do, you're going to end up with something like this. And you can see how this here kind of matches this part of the diagram here. You're going to pick up one more bead. It's going to lay on top of that bead that is right here, and you're going to pass the needle through the following bead. You will continue picking up beads and threading the needle through every other bead until you get to the very end. The first 2 rows are always the trickiest, but as you can see, once you get the hang of it, it really is quite simple. Now, the thing that makes odd count peyote stitch a little bit different from even count is that once you get to the very end here, you are stuck with these 2 side-by-side beads that aren't really attached. So let me show you what you do next to take care of that. The turn at the end of the row isn't difficult to do, but it's a little tricky to explain. So I made another diagram. If you're a visual learner, this might help. Essentially what you do when you get to the end, and I will demonstrate here, is you pass your needle back through the previous row, the first bead on the previous row. In this case, it's the very first bead we put on after the stopper bead. So our thread just came out here. We're putting it back through that first one. We're also putting it back through the second one. And you pull it through, like so. At this point, what you're going to do is you can see that little thread that just, the original thread here that passed through. You are going to use your needle to loop around it. So just pass that through, make a little loop around, then pull that tight. And you might have to do a little bit of finessing here to get the tension correct again. Once you loop it around, you're going to go back out the way you came. Go through the middle bead, through the end bead again, turn around, come back up through that first, or through the last bead on the second row. Pull all of your ends tight. And from here you are ready to add your next bead. And then you just go on, you pick up a bead. The reason the next rows are a little bit easier is because the first two rows created nice little spaces. So you can see exactly where the next bead is supposed to lay. You work one at a time all the way across. Now the nice thing is, when you get to the end, there's already a nice even space for you right there. And you just grab a bead and push it through the last bead of the last row. At the end of my rows, on this side anyway, I always like to grab this last bead after I thread through and pull. That makes sure all of the other beads are nice and tight, and then I pull the tension again. From here, you're going to work all the way back across, same as you've been doing. And again, when you get to the very end, as before, you're going to do the same turn that you did for the first row. Just remember, you're passing through the last two beads on the previous row, making a loop around the thread there, coming back out, and starting over. And that is how you do odd count peyote stitch.